This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. President Carter delivers a special address to the United Nations this evening, and he's expected to place particular emphasis on his continuing campaign for worldwide human rights. He arrived in New York after wrapping up his first Meet the People tour that took him to a town meeting in Massachusetts and an energy conference in West Virginia. Robert Pierpoint reports.
The president's UN speech tonight is wide-ranging, but its greatest impact is almost sure to come from his strong words on human rights. Noting that all the signatories of the UN Charter have pledged themselves to observe and respect basic human rights, President Carter declares, quote, "Thus, no member of the United Nations can claim that mistreatment of its citizens is solely its own business," reminding the UN diplomats that this is a fundamental and historic American birthright. The president further says, ours is a commitment, not just a political posture. President Carter also suggests the UN Human Rights Commission should be more active and should move back to New York, where a free press can keep an eye on it. Finally, in what sounds almost like a challenge, President Carter declares that when gross or widespread violations take place in human rights that violate the UN Charter or the Helsinki Agreement, it is the concern of all and must be taken as seriously as violations of other international agreements. The president also stresses tonight his hopes for a nuclear disarmament agreement with the Soviet Union, apparently in the belief that this can be done despite his obvious dispute with the Kremlin over human rights. Robert Pierpoint, CBS News, Charleston, West Virginia.
President Carter's United Nations address this evening will be carried live on CBS beginning at 7:30 Eastern Time. During that town meeting he attended in Clinton, Massachusetts last night, Mr. Carter talked about a Middle East peace, and that triggered a flurry of diplomatic questions today. The president had said one solution to the Palestinian problem should be a homeland for refugees, but he did not elaborate. The remark appeared to be the latest in a string of surprises he has sprung on the foreign policy experts, both his own and those of other nations, as Marvin Kalb reports.
To the president's critics, it's called the open mouth policy. To his supporters, it's a refreshing change from the old-time mumbo-jumbo and secrecy. Either way, it is clear Mr. Carter's eagerness to expose his knowledge about foreign policy has baffled diplomats along Embassy Row, confused and embarrassed his own bureaucracy, and created a bewildering international situation. At his town hall meeting last night, even the president acknowledged the problem.
I've been criticized by some in the news media in the last 8 weeks about telling the American people too much.
But then he proceeded to add even more confusion by raising the possibility of a Palestinian homeland.
There has to be a homeland provided for the Palestinian refugees who have suffered for many, many years.
The president seems to enjoy the process of ventilating ideas and proposals. Witness, for example, this avalanche at his last news conference.
The Arab nations, the Israeli nation, has to agree on permanent and recognized borders where sovereignty is legal as mutually agreed. My commitment to withdraw American ground troops from Korea has not changed. We've also proposed that the Indian Ocean be completely demilitarized.
And it's not just the president who is keeping the diplomatic world guessing. It is also his UN ambassador, Andrew Young. His comments, for example, about Cuba, Africa, and Great Britain have produced a succession of official clarifications. Even one of Young's deputies, Brady Tyson, intoxicated by this apparent license to speak one's mind, spoke his at a recent meeting of the UN Human Rights Commission, apologizing for America's role in undermining the Chilean regime of Salvador Allende. But unlike Young, Tyson got reprimanded. On Capitol Hill, this has created more than just confusion. It's also created a political opportunity for the Republicans.
I have to be also concerned about this do-it-yourself diplomacy that with Andy Young and saying the things that he wants to say at the drop of a hat, and the president himself on a given moment.
But Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski, the president's national security advisor, sees careful planning where others see the signs of inexperience.
The public simply hasn't become accustomed to a truly open style. But that open style, I want to emphasize, is based very much on premeditation. When the president speaks, he speaks with considerable authority, with a great deal of forethought.
So far as one can tell, Brzezinski did not know that the president was going to talk publicly about a Palestinian homeland, nor did Secretary of State Vance, nor any top Middle East expert, and they spent most of the day trying to contain the diplomatic damage. Most officials here applaud the president's candor, but wonder whether his outspoken style can genuinely coexist with delicate diplomacy, especially in the volatile Middle East. Marvin Kalb, CBS News, the State Department.
Presidential News Secretary Jody Powell played down Mr. Carter's reference to a homeland for Palestinians, saying it has no particular significance. But Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat said in Cairo that the remark was an important step that touched the core of the problem. In Israel, however, Prime Minister Rabin said the remark troubled him. President Carter, on his visit to West Virginia today, gave some clues to the energy program he's formulating. He proclaimed an end to the Nixon policy of self-sufficiency and spoke of, quote, one inevitable major shift from oil and gas to coal. Bob Schieffer has more on the story.
Spring arrived in West Virginia ahead of Mr. Carter, so it was a beautiful day as he came to the Gold Dome state capitol here. After gulping down a hamburger and French fries with Governor Jay Rockefeller in the Capitol employees' dining room, Mr. Carter convened the panel of energy experts. It included administration officials, one working coal miner, and representatives of coal unions, the power companies, and consumer groups. Mr. Carter said he had come here mostly to learn, and since West Virginia is a leading coal-producing state, much of the discussion related to coal. But one of the first things he learned was that consumers are mainly concerned about rising utility bills.
It seems as though it was so easy for him to say, we'll just pass the cost over to the consumer. And that's what really upsets me. You know, it almost straightens my hair. I sat down last night with my husband and we paid our monthly bills, and I totaled up the utility bills and they came to $120. The cost cannot continue to be passed on to the consumers. It's not very much more that we'll be able to stand.
The administration's energy chief, James Schlesinger, painted a grim picture of the energy situation, saying by the 21st century, America's oil and gas will be gone. He said that will require strict conservation now. So strict that Mr. Carter predicted the energy conservation program he'll announce next month will probably cost him some of his popularity.
But I'm willing to give up some of my own personal popularity among the people of this nation to require them to face the brutal facts that we all are going to have to work together to deal with the impending crisis that's going to come regardless in future years as energy runs out.
Although Mr. Carter strongly suggested that his energy program will be a tough one requiring sacrifice, he gave few specifics as to just what that program will include. Aides said that was because this was not a forum to lay out energy policy. Rather, they said this was a time to gather ideas on what the policy ought to be. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, Charleston, West Virginia.
Democratic Senator Abraham Ribicoff predicted today that Mr. Carter will face the biggest fight of his presidency when he tries to push his energy proposals through Congress. Mr. Carter's visit to West Virginia followed that overnight stay in Clinton, Massachusetts. Gary Shepard reports on Clinton's morning after.
The president left town just before 9 o'clock this morning after having breakfast with the Thompsons, his host family. The occasion made two of the Thompson children late for their high school classes. So before he departed, Mr. Carter wrote a note to the teacher.
Please excuse Jane for being late. She had a guest in her home.
Were you able to sleep last night with the president in the next room or the new room over?
Hey, if I can sleep with 8 kids, I can sleep with him.
Clinton went back to being just another small town today after its brief stint in the national limelight. The crowds were gone, and things were slowly getting back to normal. The fellow who was selling Jimmy Carter T-shirts yesterday at full price was having a clearance sale today, but there were few takers.
Yeah, I cut my prices.
From what to what?
From $4 to $2.50.
Okay, why is that?
St. Patrick's Day sale. Yeah, I cut my prices.
From what to what?
From $4 to $2.50.
Okay, why is that?
The St. Patrick's Day sale.
At the Old Timers Restaurant, which is the most popular gathering spot in town, the presidential visit got rave reviews.
And putting himself as a common person, I think he did a very good job. I thought it was A+.
I don't know why he came to Clinton, but I'm glad that he did.
The people responded to the president as the president is trying to respond to the people's wishes.
So with Jimmy Carter gone, the townspeople here, well over half of them Irish, got down to the serious business of celebrating St. Patrick's Day. Gary Shepard, CBS News, Clinton, Massachusetts.
The House Government Operations Committee today overwhelmingly approved legislation to give President Carter power to streamline the bureaucracy. Chairman Jack Brooks, who had wanted Congress to retain more control over the reorganization, called it, quote, the best unconstitutional bill that can be drawn up. The bill's slightly different than one passed by the Senate. The water-starved West Coast is getting some relief from the drought. Rain and snow fell in parts of Washington and Oregon today after heavy rain and snowfall last night. In Southern California, there was an unwelcome accompaniment to the rain. Terry Drinkwater reports.
For most of parched California, the clouds brought rain. But the storm last night turned into a freak tornado in the Orange County suburb of Fullerton. Factories smashed by the winds, the funnel lifting off roofs. Police said cars were picked up 20 feet into the air and then flung to the ground again. Tornadoes are virtually unheard of in this state. Damage was spotty in a path from the coast 30 miles inland. Concrete block walls knocked down, trees uprooted, power and telephone lines knocked out. In some places, service still not restored. At the Worth's house, a wooden beam as if stabbed through the roof by the wind.
All of a sudden, there was this terrible noise that was like a train, yet I knew it wasn't. I knew it was the storm, and it was real high-pitched, and it was just all through the whole house. I could just, this high roaring, like a train, but yet much more powerful, and I knew that it was the storm, but I didn't understand what kind of storm we had, you know, because I had never been in something like that.
To the north, the storm was more gentle, only minor flooding and some badly needed runoff flowing into California's critically low reservoirs. The front has now passed through the state, but there was not enough precipitation to even begin to end the drought. In the San Joaquin Valley, cattlemen are still selling off their herds. There won't be enough grain and pasture land to support them. In the Pacific Northwest, this latest series of storm fronts has increased the snowpack, yet the runoff won't be sufficient to ease this summer's hydroelectric power shortage. But it was enough to fill up some of the rivers and streams, so fish could be netted again. The first good news for sportsmen and the Oregon-Washington fishing industry this year. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, Fullerton, California.
3 major airlines have been flying coast to coast with only about half their seats filled. So today, in a bid to fill the other half, they began offering big discount fares on some transcontinental travel. But the airlines cautioned hopeful travelers that this was not the beginning of generally lower fares. They told us that because of rising operating costs, passengers likely will be paying more, not less, for tickets on flights between most cities. Moonies, they're called, the followers of the controversial Reverend Sun Myung Moon. 5 Moonies and their parents have been in a San Francisco courtroom since last week, exchanging charges of brainwashing and kidnapping. Harold Dow reports.
With rallies like this one, Reverend Sun Moon's Unification Church has been very successful in recruiting new members for his movement. Many of those who follow his religious teachings are young people. Once they join, they perform as cheerleaders, fundraisers, and spiritual disciples, espousing the religious ideals of Reverend Moon and his church wherever they go. But some parents have become so worried about their children that they have resorted to illegal kidnappings and deprogrammings to get them away from what they feel is Moon's brainwashing. Many of the children involved are over 21, and in a San Francisco courtroom, a hearing is underway to determine whether parents can control what their children do, even though they are adults. 5 families from around the country have come here petitioning the court for permission to legally deprogram their offspring, who have become followers of Reverend Moon.
I feel that's a total violation of who I am, or any kind of trust or mutual sharing at all. And it really sickened me. It hurt me very much because I had more faith in them. I had more faith in their faith in me.
We don't really want to win control of her affairs. We want to give her an opportunity, free of influence from the movement, to make this very critical decision in her life.
Superior Court Judge S. Lee Barbaras is presiding over the hearing. On one side, attorneys for the parents claim that the children have been subject to mind control and brainwashing. The attorneys want the court to grant the parents guardianship for 30 days for deprogramming. On the other side, attorneys for the Unification Church claim the children merely exercise their constitutional right of freedom of religion, and to grant the parents' request would be exactly what the church has been accused of: brainwashing.
I feel the allegations are unfounded. I really don't feel that I have been subjected to coercive persuasion or brainwashing. I think it's ridiculous.
And if he decides to go back with the Unification Church?
We have told him we would not restrict him from doing that. We want him for 30 days to see if he really has free control over his mind, his thought, and his actions.
The decision facing Judge Barbaras goes far beyond this courtroom. He must decide whether to grant the parents guardianship or uphold their children's constitutional rights. And his decision may determine the legality of efforts by parents around the country to wrest control of their offspring from Reverend Moon. The decision is expected next week. Harold Dow, CBS News, San Francisco.
In 1974, former United Mine Workers leader W.A. Tony Boyle was convicted for ordering the murder of union rival Joseph Yablonsky. Last year, he began his life sentence. Today, with his daughter at his side, Boyle left the Pittsburgh prison where he spent most of his time in the hospital ward. Now 75, he is awaiting retrial. Wendy Yoshimura was sentenced this evening to 1 to 15 years in jail following her conviction of possessing illegal weapons and explosives. Yoshimura was captured a year and a half ago when police raided the apartment she shared in San Francisco with Patricia Hearst. 26 workmen were injured, 22 of them seriously burned, when 3 explosions and a fire ripped through part of a Texaco refinery in Port Arthur, Texas today. The Irish and their friends are celebrating St. Patrick's Day today. Chicago's annual parade was dedicated to the memory of the Irish mayor who had led the march for 21 years, Richard J. Daley, who died last December. Lebanon's murdered leftist leader, Kamal Jumblat, was buried today in his small village southeast of Beirut. Throughout Lebanon, the Arab League peacekeeping force kept a nervous watch over a country teetering on renewed hostilities. Mike Lee reports.
The bodies of Jumblat, his chauffeur, and an aide lay in state at the slain leader's home in the Shuf village of Muqtara. Jumblat's followers, many of them young men who had fought as volunteers in his leftist militia, were stunned and angry. There were reports of scattered reprisal raids against nearby Christian villages, along with several street slayings in the capital Beirut, where Jumblat supporters held a one-day strike. Movement between Christian and Muslim neighborhoods was all but halted, and there were fears that the tension here would erupt into open fighting. Jumblat's son, Walid, issued a plea for calm and blamed his father's murders on the Israelis. As the day wore on, emotions grew more intense. Several thousand mourners came to pay their respects. Women came in groups, sobbing and chanting. Wave after wave of Jumblat supporters filed through the villa, and entire villages came as one, led by white-hatted Druze sheikhs. Although Jumblat's influence over Lebanese politics had suffered with the Syrian-imposed ceasefire, he died with thousands of militiamen devoted to his cause. Many here now hope that Jumblat the martyr will breathe new life into a movement he had been unable to lead to victory. Mike Lee, CBS News, Muqtara, Lebanon.
That 5-member U.S. presidential delegation met in Hanoi today with Vietnamese Premier Pham Van Dom, who praised the new spirit of the Carter administration. In reply, delegation leader Leonard Woodcock praised the Vietnamese as a proud and courageous people. There was a slight foul-up just before that meeting. Woodcock brought from Mr. Carter a letter for Dong, but when he got to Dong's palace, he thought that everyone else had the letter. They thought he had it, and Woodcock had to order an aide back to the guest house to fetch it. A U.S. embassy official in Kinshasa, Zaire, said today that invasion forces from Angola are advancing in the province of Shaba, formerly Katanga, and the situation there is deteriorating. The evacuation of more Americans in the province was ordered. Last summer, Oakland A's owner Charlie Finley sold 3 of his star players for $3.5 million. Baseball commissioner Bowie Kuhn stopped the sale, said it wasn't in the best interest of baseball. Finley filed a $3.5 million suit. He said the players belonged to him. Today, a federal judge upheld Kuhn's right to cancel the sale. Finley now says he'll appeal. Paced by a record increase in paychecks last month, total personal income in this country recovered from its cold weather slowdown. It grew at an annual rate of about $17 billion, in line with its gains late last year. The Dow Jones Industrial Average ended its streak of gains today with a decline of more than 3 points. Volume on the New York Stock Exchange was 20,700,000 shares. The average price per share lost 3 cents on the New York Exchange. It gained 3 cents on the American. That series of reports on corruption in Arizona that the other day linked Senator Barry Goldwater to mob figures, today said that Goldwater's brother Robert maintains business and social relationships with several mobsters. The investigation was conducted by reporters from 24 newspapers and 2 broadcast stations. But not even all of those organizations have been running the series. And in Phoenix, as Sharon Lovejoy reports, the investigation is hardly getting any coverage.
Throughout the United States, the series of reports alleging widespread criminal activity in Arizona has received modest circulation at best, and even less than that in Arizona itself. The state's largest newspapers, the Republic and the Gazette, have decided not to print the reports as a series, despite the fact that the murder of Don Bowles, longtime investigative reporter for the Republic, prompted the investigation. The newspapers say they've already published all the information in the report that could be verified. They say it would be irresponsible to publish unverified statements and allegations. In Tucson, the Arizona Daily Star is printing edited versions of the report, which has quickly become a bestseller in Phoenix. 5,000 copies a day are now being sold instead of the usual 300. Even the Maricopa County Young Democrats have been helping to distribute the Tucson paper. State Senator Sue Dye says that printing the story in only one major paper just isn't enough.
I think the Arizona Republic should particularly run the series, whether other papers do or not, because it concerns Arizona, it concerns Phoenix. They are a Pulliam paper. Indianapolis Star is a Pulliam paper, and if they can't substantiate it here, why could they there? It's the same chain.
The owners of the Pulliam newspaper chain have refused to comment on their decision. Phoenix television stations, forced to rely on wire service versions of the reports, unable to verify many of the allegations to their own satisfaction, have been reluctant to broadcast what they do not know to be true.
Cool News feels that publishing of such material would be irresponsibly inconsistent with prevailing standards of good journalism.
There is public pressure for the Phoenix papers to print the story, but like all news media in Arizona, they are trying to walk a fine line between responsible journalism and the suppression of information. Sharon Lovejoy, CBS News, Phoenix.
And that's the way it is. Thursday, March 17th, 1977. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
This has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. For the latest news early, watch the CBS Morning News with Hughes Rudd and Bruce Morton.
Barnaby Jones must convince a frightened young woman to turn state's evidence, even if it means losing her life in the process. Buddy Ebsen and Lee Merriweather star in Barnaby Jones, tonight at 10, right here on Television 8. This is CBS.